Good morning, and thank you for viewing our video today. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and on LinkedIn. We ask you to comment, to like, to share our videos, whether you view them on Facebook or on YouTube. We also ask you to visit our website, which is www.travelltravis.com, as well as our fan page on Facebook, our YouTube channel for our law office as well. Just a disclaimer, our videos are for educational and advertising purposes and does not create an attorney-client relationship, nor is a substitute for consulting a licensed attorney in your state. Today I want to start what is scheduled to at least be a three-part series on the subject of church trustees. In particular, the question whether a church actually needs trustees is what we discuss today. Just a simple definition of trustees. Trustees are essentially representatives of the membership or the congregation to make financial decisions and manage the physical or financial affairs of the church congregation, church organization. While they should be spiritual people, they do not necessarily make or decide the spiritual affairs of the church. We have the spiritual aspect of the church, but then we also have arguably the business side of the church. And so the trustees are responsible for the business side of the church, whereas your pastor, your ministers, your auxiliary leaders, as well as your deacons are responsible for the spiritual leadership and decision making for the church. And so as part of this three-part series, the first question we're going to discuss is, do you really need trustees for your church? The second question that we hope to address is, how should trustees be selected, or legally, how should they or can they be selected, or are there any types of restrictions or prohibitions in terms of how trustees are to be selected? And then thirdly, we want to discuss perhaps criteria or characteristics that would make a good trustee or perhaps a good trustee on board. So the question is, do you really need trustees for your church? And I'm going to give 6 reasons why not. Number 1, your church currently has zero funding from outsiders. What am I saying? Pretty much the church or the ministry currently is solely funded by arguably the pastor or the pastor's family. That doesn't mean that you don't get periodic donations here or there, but largely pretty much 100% of the funding or the financing of the church comes from one individual or one family. So in that regard, then that one family or that one individual arguably could make all of the financial decisions regarding a particular church or congregation. Number 2, which ties into this, is the church has zero membership beyond perhaps the pastor or the pastor's family. So you have zero membership, or in particular, zero adult members. A lot of times when churches get started, it may be a lot of children. And so in terms of them being underage or minors, not necessarily financially contributing, not necessarily being legal to enter into contracts or make decisions, arguably if you have zero outside funding and you have zero members, then arguably you don't have to have trustees. The disclaimer to that, or the caveat to that, is once you have members, not just attenders, not just the supporters, but actual members, people who have actually, by whatever means your church requires, have become official members of the church and are in good standing and are regular financial supporters. We're not talking about people who show up and don't really give any money, but people who are regular financial supporters, tithers, offerings, sacrificial offerings. Then arguably they should have somewhat of a say in terms of how the money is being spent and some type of input on the financial decisions of the church. what does this mean when you go from bringing in outside money beyond the pastor's family or house or members outside of perhaps the pastor's house? We're actually making a shift. We're saying that it's no longer my church, but our church, when you have members and their money for the church. So as long as it is my church, then I can make arguably the decisions. However, when it becomes our church, then we should be making decisions for the congregation. Number three, another way to perhaps not have trustees is if you have a pre-approved annual budget. Perhaps there's a budget presented to the congregation. Congregation approves or ratifies that budget, which has specific spending limit and ranges for rent, utilities, equipment purchases and repairs. And so you don't really have to have a regular meeting of a board to review every financial transaction. If perhaps every year or every 2 years biennially, there's a budget that's been approved by the congregation, and a person, arguably the pastor, can go ahead as long as they stick within those guidelines. That's a little bit tricky, but that's also something to consider as well. Number four, the fourth reason why your church may not need trustees is that everything that the church owns, or all the debts and liabilities that the church has, is in the sole name of the pastor, which means to a certain extent, yes, it's in the pastor's name, the lease, the purchase of equipment, any loans or liabilities in the name of the pastor. So arguably, if everything's in the name of the pastor, then arguably the pastor has full responsibility. Now, the benefit is that person arguably can make all of the decisions. The drawback of that is that also all the risk, all the liability, all the lawsuits will also fall solely on the pastor. So as we shared in other videos, the importance of incorporating to create that separate legal entity that's separate and apart from the congregation. But if a person size that may be based on the age of the church or the size of the church, or perhaps inability to establish credit, or perhaps the percentage of which the funding comes from one source, then in those cases the pastor may have everything solely in their name. And so if everything is solely in the name of the pastor, then arguably, once again, you could make the case that it's my church rather than our church. But the caveat to that still goes back to, once you have members that are not only just supporters in attendance and supporters of the ministry, but also financial supporters, then that ministry goes from being my ministry to our ministry. And once it becomes our ministry, we should have a say in the financial affairs of that ministry. Number five, the fifth reason why you may not have trustees for your church is that everyone votes. All members of the congregation, all adult members in good standing, financial contributors, however you define that, all have a vote on the financial decisions of the church. I mentioned earlier pre-approval of a budget as one mechanism, but just in general, every major transaction comes before the entire church. If you have 5, 10, maybe 20 members, you may decide that every major decision, I'm going to bring it to the entire congregation to vote. Now, why is this important? Remember, trustees are representatives. They give voice to the congregation. So the purpose or primary reason for the trustees is to avoid having to have all financial decisions be presented to the entire body. The body selects certain representatives to represent them in making these decisions. However, for a small church or for a church that wants to be totally democratic, think about even in our United States government. We are a democratic republic, meaning everyone has one vote, but not all of us on Capitol Hill making decisions. We elect representatives who then makes laws on our behalf. So essentially, trustees are those representatives. So we have it one of two ways: either the entire body, a pure democracy, everybody votes on everything, or you have a republic form of democracy in which the body selects representatives, and then those representatives vote and have a say on what's being done. So once again, number 4, if everyone votes on everything, then perhaps you don't have to have trustees to represent the body if the body is making all the decisions as a collective group. Number 6, and lastly, reason why you may not need trustees for your church is your legal structure. Arguably, if a church does not incorporate and it remains a unincorporated association, you may not have trustees, arguably, because if you incorporate, your incorporation is going to require you to specify the number of trustees, who they are, how they're selected, what their terms may be. And so once again, if you choose not to incorporate your church, then arguably you don't necessarily have to have trustees. But as we said in previous videos, a church that does not incorporate means that all risks, liabilities, and debts fall on the members individually and not on the church or the congregation collectively. So if there's a lawsuit, if there's a debt or default on a financial liability, someone has a slip and fall, there's a car accident, arguably, then the individual members of the church will have to pay for that debt for the church. So once again, if a church does not incorporate, once again, go back to that democratic form of governance, all the members make all the decisions, you may not need trustees. A second area in that regard, in relation to number 6, is if you opt not to have a 501c3. He said churches are automatically tax exempt if they meet the criteria for a church, but for various reasons, a church may opt to actually get the official 501c3 recognition from the IRS. If you go that route, the IRS will require a minimum of 3 trustees, 3 directors, not related all by blood or marriage. Okay, so once again, if you set up a more sophisticated structure in terms of incorporating or a 501c3, then you're going to be required to have trustees. If your church chooses not to have the 501c3, if your church chooses not to incorporate, then it may arguably not have those 3 to 5 trustees that the law requires. But once again, that still goes back to the issue of, do you have members? Do you have regular financial supporters? Who's approving the budget? Whose name is on the financial responsibilities? Are things in the name of the pastor only, or is it in the name of the church? Because once again, the issue becomes, if something goes wrong, the pastor can't say in one area, it's my church, and then in other areas, it's our church. It's one or the other. Okay, what are we talking about? If I can make all the decisions, it's my church, I make all the decisions. But if something goes wrong financially, it's our church, and we got to figure this out. That's where you have the issue. Because arguably, if a debt is incurred in the name of a church without the church through its proper representatives, e.g. either the trustees or the body as a whole, then that debt falls on the person who signed for it, regardless of whether you have an incorporation, regardless of whether you have trustees, regardless of whether you have a 501c3. That's the risk of operating a church without trustees. So once again, what are the consequences? The debt, the liability, solely on the pastor. Once again, you can't say it's not my responsibility if it's my church versus if it's our church. Then if it's our church, then our voice, either directly through the collective democratic voting or indirectly through our selection of trustees who represents us, those decisions can be made. There's more I can say on this topic, but I'm going to stop right here. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, perhaps I wasn't clear on something, please comment below, inbox me, email me, or even call me. My email, travelltravis@gmail.com. Telephone number, area code 757-528-8529. Perhaps I can address your questions individually or directly, or if it's something that's can benefit the collective, perhaps we can share or explain or elaborate more on a future video. Once again, these videos are for educational and advertising purposes and is not a substitute for an attorney, nor creates an attorney-client relationship. If these and other videos are helpful, please once again like, share, comment. My videos are on Facebook as well as on YouTube. We encourage you to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. Visit our website, travelltravis.com. Email us, travelltravis@gmail.com. Or once again, call us at 757-528-8529. Once again, may God bless you and have a smile upon you and your ministry. God bless you in Jesus' name.